Hey, what's up? This Mosquito Spray. You tuning into Mosquito Spray Boxing Breakdown. Today we're gonna talk about the 140-pound division, man. In my opinion, it's one of the hottest divisions in boxing right now. But at the same time, it's a division that doesn't have a real boss. All these guys that are pictured are current or former champions, and from what some people may think this thing could go either way. In either one of these five directions. And the guys that are pictured are as follows. You got Teofimo Lopez, Alberto Cuello, Gary Antoine Russell, Subriel Matias, and Richardson Hitchens. So what I'm going to do today, man, we're going to break all these guys down, see what they've accomplished so far in the division, talk about the attributes and things like that, and just see who possibly when the dust settles, who will come out on top. So let's go and get into this thing. Now, first up, we got Teofimo Lopez, who is currently the WBO and lineal champion. He has a record of 22 wins, 1 loss, no draw with 13 knockouts. Lopez previously made his name at 35 when he became, unified and lineal champion by, getting the big victory over Vasyl Lomachenko and previously Richard Coleman, of course, to get the IBF belt. But, of course, after losing to Kambosos, he moved up to 140. And since he's been at the division, as far as his notable fights go, he got a split decision victory over Sandor Martin, which was pretty controversial in the eyes of many. He was dropped twice. I believe both of them were called slips. It was not an impressive performance at all. And I think before the scorecards got announced, the cameras caught him asking his father if he still, something along the lines of, I still got it, kind of doubting himself or whatever. So public kind of got down on him after that fight. Then he followed that up, though, with one of, if not the best performance of his career. He took down Josh Taylor by unanimous decision to become, the WBO and lineal champion. A lot of people expect him to lose that fight, but he put on the show that night, was dominant, and beat Taylor pretty soundly. And then after that, Jermaine Ortiz, who he beat by unanimous decision, and most recently here on the Riyadh season card in New York City, he beat Arnold Barbosa Jr., gave him his first loss by unanimous decision. And as far as how Lopez has looked since he's been in the division, he's still got the fast hands, the foot speed, creative fighter, can box still and all that. But the one thing, of course, if you remember at 35, he was a pretty devastating puncher, stopping guys, doing backflips. For as far as I see, since he's been at 140, I forgot the first guy he fought or whatever. That, besides that performance, man, he has not. It doesn't seem like he's carried his power up to the division, man. He's having a hard time keeping some of these guys off of him, and I just don't. Of course, like the Steve Claggett fight, he couldn't keep that guy off of me. It was a hard pitch fight, man, and I just don't know if his power gonna be able to hold up against a guy like a Matias or Gary Antoine Russell if you get in with these guys. Of course, I know he has aspirations for big fights and possibly move up to 47. He recently called out Jaron Ennis, and of course, he mentioned Crawford's name. I don't think that's real or nothing like that, but maybe he's thinking about moving up to 47 where it's big money at or whatever. But as far as this division, he is lineal and WBO champion, like I said. And if you got to pick one guy to put at the top of the heap, then maybe it is him because of the lineal title. But nobody stands head and shoulders above the rest right now, and we'll see how it play out. But that's it on Teofimo Lopez. Let's get to the next guy. All right, next up, we got Subriel Matias. He's currently the WBC champion and has a record of 23 wins, 2 losses, no draws, with 22 knockouts. And he was the IBF champion before. He lost that to Liam Paro. And as far as his notable fights, man, the first one being against Maxim Dadashev, who he stopped in the 11th round. And sadly, after that fight, Dadashev ended up passing away. Jeremias Ponce, who he stopped in the 5th round. Ponce came in 30-0, 20 knockouts. After that was Shoja Ergashev, came in 23-0, 20 knockouts. And of course, Dadashev came in 13-0, 11 knockouts. He was a good young prospect. So all these guys, he stopped these guys on their stools, basically, man. And so, of course, there was a time when Matias was seen as the boogeyman of the division. And not too many guys were too anxious to face him. He was the IBF champ, like I said, and then, of course, he went home to Puerto Rico and defended his title against Liam Paro, and ended up losing by unanimous decision. And he just didn't look. You didn't see the same consistent firepower that night, and Paro was just put on a brilliant boxing performance, man, and kind of took Matias to school that night, took his title, man. And here most recently, he was able to, get in with Alberto Puello, who was the WBC champion, and he won that fight by majority decision. There was some that thought Puello should have got the nod, but nevertheless, Matias got the victory that night. And so now he's currently the WBC champion. And so he, again, is a player into the division, looking for unification. And as far as what I see out of Matias, man, of course, he got that high work rate. He does have some pop to him, of course. You don't have all these, 22 knockouts and 23 wins for no reason. But one thing I do see with him, man, of course, the defense is lacking. He gets hit too flush too often. And here in these recent fights, of course, it's cool for a while, but after a while, by taking shot after shot, man, your chin, your body, your mental, whatever the case may be, it starts to break down. It seemed to be the case with Matias. He's been looking a little more vulnerable in these last couple of fights, man, with the Paro fight and also the Puello fight. It seemed like he's able to get shook a little bit now. And again, when you get in with some of these guys, possibly a Teofimo Lopez, of course, like I mentioned earlier, his power don't look the same that it did at 35, but sometimes it's a shot you don't see. Gary Antoine Russell, who has shown himself to be a puncher in the division, or a young guy that seemed to be sitting down on the shots a little more now, and Richardson Hitchens, you know what I'm saying? And Matias is like, it's kill or be killed with his fights, and I just don't know how far that's going to carry him, man. Of course, his fights are exciting. I'm on the edge of my seat every time he's fighting, but I just don't know how far that style is going to carry him. But nevertheless, right now, he's WBC champion. He's definitely a player in the division, and you can't talk about who's top of the division without mentioning his name. So that's it on Subriel Matias. Let's get to the next guy. All right, so next up we got Alberto Puello. He's the former WBC champion. He just recently lost the title to Subriel Matias by majority decision, like I mentioned earlier. And has a record of 24 wins, 1 loss, no draw, with 10 knockouts. So as you can see from his record, man, he's not the biggest of punchers, so kind of has to depend on his boxing ability, man, which he does definitely possess. He's a very good boxer, but that could present problems in close fights. As you can see by his notable fights, first one being against Gary Antoine Russell, in which he definitely, outboxed and outpointed Gary Antoine Russell to take a split decision. And what was a close fight, and one judge had it. I don't know what the judge did. He had it like 119, 110 for Russell, which I don't know what fight he was watching that night, but that fight definitely did not take place. Then he won a split decision against Sandor Martin. And then most recently, like I said, lost a majority decision to Subriel Matias. So again, like I mentioned earlier, as far as Puello, what I see with him, man, because of his lack of power, man, he has to outbox his opponents, man. And as you can also see, all his fights end up being close fights. And of course, boxing has a political aspect, so you don't want to be in a position, man, especially at the championship level, when you on all these promotional entities and where you putting fights all the time in the hands of the judges. Sometimes you got to be able to separate yourself, not necessarily stop everybody, but you got to be able to make things clear a lot of times. And you get in all these big fights and everything is close. Sometimes it ain't gonna work out in your favor, man. So at this moment, Puello is, doesn't hold a belt, but of course, some people thought he should have got the nod against Matias. And I mean, one loss does not ruin your career or whatever the case may be, contrary to popular belief, but the man is still a player in the division. He is still one of the top guys in the division, and he is capable, as we've seen, of beating any of these guys on any given night. So he's one of the names you got to talk about when the question come up of who's the top guy in the division. But that's it on Alberto Puello. Let's get to the next guy. All right, so next up we got Gary Antoine Russell, and he's currently the WBA champion. Has a record of 18 wins, 1 loss, no draw with 17 knockouts. As far as his notable fights, man, his first, name on his resume was Victor Postol, who used to be contender, fought Crawford back in the day, and Russell ended up stopping Postol in the 10th round via TKO. Some people thought it was a kind of a early stoppage by the ref, but at the time Russell was on a knockout streak. He had started his career with all knockouts and all his fights, so some people may have thought it was an effort to keep his knockout streak alive, but nevertheless he stopped Postol in the 10th round. Followed that up with a fight against Francis Bartholomew, a fight in which he got dropped for the first time in his career, but he ended up winning that fight by 6-round TKO. And then after that, he took on Alberto Puello for the interim WBC title. And he kind of got exposed a little bit and outboxed by Puello that night, ended up losing a split decision. And he showed some vulnerability, man. He getting outboxed, getting countered, and kind of took the school in spots, man, and suffered his first career defeat. And then after that, though, he was able to bounce back against Rayo Valenzuela and take a unanimous decision to become the WBA champion. And he did his thing against Rayo Valenzuela. He seemed to be slowing his fight game down a little bit, because that was one thing that me personally noticed about Gary Antoine Russell. Of course, some people call him a poor man Sean Porter. Of course, he don't like to hear that or whatever, but the thing I see with him is, coming out of the amateurs, it's a faster pace, because, it's about scoring. You only got 2-minute rounds in the amateurs, and, guys are used to fighting fast. You got, four 2-minute rounds or whatever the case may be, so you got to make that adjustment in the pros to slow your game down, to pick your shots and take your time. And Russell seemed to be getting ahead of himself a little bit and rushing his work. So it seemed like he started slowing things down just a tad bit against Valenzuela, and I think he needs to keep working on that and get better. But like I said, if there was one thing that I had to point out, of course, against Puello, he did show that he can be outboxed, and countered, but because sometimes he that Russell style, they throw in combination and fast hands and everything. But if your defense ain't on point at all the time, you can get touched if you say you miss something, or a guy catch and shoot, or whatever the case may be, man. So that's one thing to look out for. But of course, he's a champion, so you can't talk about who's at the top of the division without mentioning his name. And he is definitely a player in the division. And he wants all the smoke, seems like. I like him as a fighter. I like his mentality. But we'll see how I go with him, man. But that's it on Gary Antoine Russell. Let's get to the next guy. All right, so last but not least, we got Richardson Hitchens. He's currently the IBF champion with a record of 20 wins, no loss, no draw, with 8 knockouts. As far as the notable fights, he defeated John Bowser by unanimous decision. Beat Jose Zepeda by unanimous decision. Beat Gustavo Lemos by unanimous decision. And then beat Liam Paro by split decision. And then in the most recent fight, took down George Kambosos by 8th round stoppage. Now, as far as these fights, some of these names whether we recognize him or not. John Bowser. He was a good young contender. He came in undefeated, 17-0, 7 knockouts. Of course, Hitchens dominated him. Zepeda was 37-3, 28 knockouts. Had some good wins on his record, and only lost to top guys like Prograis, Jose Ramirez. Top guys. You know what I'm saying? And of course, Hitchens was dominant against him. Gustavo Lemos, that was controversial. Some people thought Hitchens lost that fight, but Hitchens got the decision. And of course, in that fight, he was hurt a couple times by Lemos. Lemos came in 29-0, 19 knockouts. Hitchens blamed, he blamed his, lack, his performance against Lemos on the 10-pound IBF rehydration, rule or whatever. Say that, he had a hard time with that. I guess he's gotten that under control. And of course, he's mentioned now he wants unification bouts to not have to deal with that. The Paro fight, Paro was riding high. He just took the IBF title off of Matias, and Hitchens dominated Paro. That, of course, the result is a split decision. In my eyes, it should have been a unanimous decision. Who was Nelson Vasquez, one of the judges? He actually had a 117, 111 for Paro, which was crazy. But be as it may, he dominated Paro, and of course, he just destroyed Kambosos. Some people, whatever the case, Kambosos might not be viewed that highly, whatever, but he did beat Teofimo Lopez. You know what I'm saying? And he is a former world champion. So Hitchens, he has looked the part. He has worked his way up, and he didn't get to make his name until he got away from Mayweather Promotions and got with Eddie Hearn, and now he's able to make some of these fights. Man, he's calling out. Of course, he's talking about going up to 4-7 fighting Devin Haney. So who knows what's gonna become of that? But if he chooses to stick around his division and lock up with some of these other champions, man, it can make for some interesting fights, man. Like I said, he's starting to sit down on the shots a little better and hurt these guys. You know what I'm saying? Putting some hurt on these guys. And of course, he is a master boxer with a great jab, and he's the youngest out of all these guys, I believe. Also, I think he might be younger than Gary Antoine, but Teofimo. But yeah, I think he's like 26, 27. But I think he's the youngest out of these champions or whatever. So, could make for some interesting fights if you choose to stick around. But of course, like I said, with the rest of them, you can't talk about who's the top guy in the division without mentioning his name. So that's it on Hitchens. So let's tally them all up and see what we think. All right, so let's go over these guys again, man. So we got Teofimo Lopez, currently the WBO and lineal champion. We got Alberto Puello, the former WBC champion. We got Gary Antoine Russell, the current WBA champion. We got Subriel Matias, currently the WBC champion. We got Richardson Hitchens, currently the IBF champion. So for all these guys, of course, there's been a couple of them to get the lockup. You got Puello, who fought both Russell and fought Matias. He beat Russell and lost to Matias. Of course, it was controversial, whatever the case may be, but it is what it is at this point. So that is 2 bouts we have seen out of these 5 guys. So if the rest of these guys lock up, and if they would have a round robin, who would I personally think come out on top? I gotta go with my guy Hitchens, man. Out of all these 5 guys, 4 of them have shown ways that they can be beat. They've shown cracks in their armor. Like I said, Lopez, I don't know if his power is carried up. He has been able to be touched in some of these fights. Matias, aside from that, the high work rate and the power, he can be hit and hurt himself. Puello, the lack of power. He has to outbox everyone. All his fights are close fights, especially on these big stages. And then he does not always get the nod, as we just saw. Gary Antoine Russell, he looks the part, young, high work rate, good combination, fast hands, power. But again, still kind of in that amateur style, still trying to find his way as a pro, and has been shown that he can be outboxed and countered. You know what I'm saying? We've shown that by Puello, Hitchens. You know, in these fights I've seen, these notable fights, he's fought undefeated guys. He's fought guys with big power. You know what I'm saying? Zepeda, 28 knockouts and 37 wins. Lemos, 19 knockouts and 29 wins. Paro, 15 knockouts and 25 wins. You know what I'm saying? He's tamed all these guys, man, with that long telephone pole jab, man. And like I said, he's starting to sit down in these shots. He went to the body very well against Kambosos, stopped him. You know what I'm saying? And he's looking the part, man. I mean, yeah, he's talking about possibly moving up, but hopefully he'll stick around, man, and make some of these fights and establish himself as the boss of this division, man. I believe that's what can happen if he sticks around in this division. He's still young. I believe he can still make this weight. And of course, with the unification bouts, we won't have to worry about the 10-pound rehydration rules, the IBF. So that's my pick, man. Let me know what y'all think, man. Appreciate y'all listening to me. Hit me up in the comments, man. Let me know who y'all think, whether it's one of these 5 guys or somebody else. I know Keyshawn Davis talking about possibly coming up to this division, but at the same time, he's talking about taking a whole year off, so that's some ways off. So for now, I think it's out of these 5 guys. But whoever y'all think, man, I'd like to hear about it. In the meantime, y'all take it light.